directory. Foundation directory is great for researching foundations and potential grants to apply for, whereas GuideStar is great for researching nonprofit organizations, as presumably most of you are nonprofit organizations. And so nonprofits use Foundation Directory to research potential funders, and meanwhile, funders use GuideStar to research potential grantees, if that makes sense. So yeah, my name's Tracy. We've heard enough about me. What we're talking about today is how to identify your funding needs before you search the Foundation Directory. How do you find prospects using a prospect-based search? And how do you evaluate who are your good grant prospects and who are your kind of prospects who are not as good a fit? And we will also talk a little bit about how people use GuideStar and how to maybe put your best foot forward on GuideStar, because if you are a 501c3 nonprofit, you are in GuideStar whether you know it or not. So maybe let's begin by kind of leaning most heavily on our Foundation Directory foot, because I think this is the one that really gets the most use from nonprofits. So, in a world where you are not using a database like this one, how else might you be looking for grants? You might just be Googling grant opportunities, like, oh, grants for environmental organizations in Connecticut, for instance. You could do that, but the problem is when you're just using a regular search engine, you are only getting the foundations that have a web presence. And there are lots and lots of different funders floating around out there, but only about 10% of them have websites. So the problem is, if you're just using Google, you are only getting the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. And the reasons why 90% of funders don't have websites, those reasons can vary. But honestly, the biggest reason why most funders don't have websites is because most of them are not the Ford Foundation, and most of them are not the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Most funders are teeny tiny little family foundations. And like if you think of a place like the Ford Foundation, they have a lot of staff. They have program directors, they have program officers, program associates, program assistants, they got interns, they got everything. The point is they have infrastructure. So a place like that can handle a lot of visibility, and they can handle receiving thousands of grant applications every year from all kinds of people. But a really small family foundation, oftentimes they might have a few staff members, or they might have just one paid staff member, or a lot of them have no staff members at all, that they are literally just family foundations being run by a family with maybe some help from a lawyer or a financial advisor. And when that's the case, they cannot handle being found by thousands and thousands of nonprofits out there and receiving grant proposals from all of them when they don't have the capacity to read through and review all of those proposals. So that is the biggest reason why not everybody has a website. But all of those same foundations, regardless of whether they're enormous or very tiny or in between, they are all subject to the same rules and regulations as any other grant-making foundation, which is that they are required to give out at least 5% of their assets every year. This is the big difference between foundations and individual donors. Any of us people, we have a choice whether we want to donate to a nonprofit or not. And at times when we're doing okay financially and we're feeling a little extra generous, we can give a bit more to charity. And at times when things are a little more financially uncertain, we may play it safe and we might not be giving, which is kind of what the giving landscape is looking like right now in the late pandemic era, where a lot of people are just unsure about what their financial futures look like. And a lot of individuals are not necessarily giving as much as they would otherwise. But foundations don't get to make that choice. They are heavily regulated by the IRS and they have to give out grants every year, no matter what. And this, if anything, is the fantastic thing about foundations as one of your kind of revenue streams, is that they're a little more stable, they're a little more reliable, and even if they don't have a web presence, you can still find them. Because one of the other many regulations facing foundations is that their tax returns are public documents. The same way any of you who are nonprofits, your tax returns, your Form 990s, those are public documents that absolutely anyone can look at on the internet any day of the week. The same applies to foundations. And at the same time, if anyone has ever spent time looking at a foundation's tax return, it's not the most delightful way to while away an afternoon. It's a really bleak, giant 50-page PDF of all this dense financial information. But there's a better way. Better way is Foundation Directory. It has over 240,000 different funders inside it, along with listings of people who have been receiving grant funding over the years and information about all of those different grants, so that you can really quickly and easily get an idea of what the giving landscape looks like. Back in the day, this was a book. Foundation Center started in 1956. It was a product of the McCarthy era, the same level of intense government scrutiny that was faced by people in show business was also directed towards institutional philanthropy at that time. Foundations were considered very mysterious at the time. All of this money was moving around and people were wondering on the government level, who are these people anyway? How much money is floating around in these foundations? And how much money are they giving out? And who are they giving it to? And Foundation Center was created in response to all of this intense government scrutiny. It was created as a library and as a just neutral, agnostic source of information about who are the foundations and what are they doing with their money. So every year we publish a book called the Foundation Directory, and people would come to the library and flip page after page and just see listings of names of different foundations, how much money they have, how much money they give, where are they giving it, etc. And then in the late 90s, it became a database, which is much, much quicker and easier to work with. We have a whole team of programmers and data scientists whose entire job is keeping this thing as up to date and running as smoothly as possible as they can, really. And it includes profiles of all kinds of different funders, private foundations, grant-making public charities such as community foundations and like re-granting organizations. We have corporate funders in there, both corporate foundations and corporate giving programs. Federal funders are in there. The donor advised fund giving vehicles are listed in there as well, which is that's its own thing, really. We can talk about that more at length later if anyone has questions about donor advised funds. But the point is, we have a ton of information in this thing, but it's made to be easy to use, regardless of whether you are kind of a trained researcher who uses databases all the time, or whether you're just a mere mortal. We get our information from a lot of places. The 10% of funders who do have websites, yeah, we look at their websites and we take information from there. We also pull a lot of information from people's tax returns and from their annual reports. You can get a lot of good information from an annual report. We run our own news site at Candid called Philanthropy News Digest, and it feeds directly into the Foundation directory. So whenever a funder has been in the news with, say, like a new funding initiative or something like that, it will find its way into that funder's grantmaker profile. We also have quite a few funders who report their information directly to us, especially a lot of the large funders. They like to make sure that their profiles are really up to date and relevant for people. And so they will often send the most current information so that we can keep it very, very current. So to jump into how to use this, and after this slide, I promise I will back out of the PowerPoint and actually use the database. You're going to want to sit down before you search and ask yourself a few questions, which are basically your organization. Who is it that you serve? Who's your population, your target audience? Where are they located geographically? And maybe that's the same place as where you yourself are located, or maybe it's somewhere entirely different. And what is it that you are doing for them? What is the service that you provide? You just want to be clear about those three things before you do a search. So with that, let's back out of the PowerPoint and go into the database, and I'll show you how you're going to use this. Okay, so here we are in the foundation directory. This is the professional level here, which is the fancy version with all the bells and whistles, and this is the version that you can access at the library. There are two different ways that you could do a search. You could do things kind of in a simplified way if you're intimidated by all of the bells and whistles. And you could just describe what you're trying to fund in this simple search bar here. And the way that they frame these searches in the examples that they show is not that different from, say, the questions that I was asking you to present to yourself. Ballet school in New York City, animal shelter in Portland, Maine, food pantry in Dallas. You get the point. What is it that you're doing? Where are you doing it? So you could do it like that, or you could get fancy. Personally, I almost never use the simple search bar because I am a librarian by trade and I like to be fancy. So let me show you how to really get in there if you want to. Up above the search button, advanced search filters. You click that. Now you're going to get some other boxes here. And if you want to continue being fancy, additional filters appear here above the search button now. Click that and you get even more. Now you can start really playing around with what exactly you are looking for. Before I really get into it, quick piece of advice: don't feel as though you have to fill out all of these boxes. Biggest mistake I ever see is just when people think that they're supposed to fill out all the boxes. Never, ever do that. If you fill everything out, either you're going to get 0 results or you're going to get really, really strange results, but it's not a good idea. A lot of the time, you really just need maybe 2 of these. And these first 2 are really where you want to focus your efforts here. You can oftentimes ignore the rest if you want. Subject area, I think, is self-explanatory. This is what's the subject area you're dealing with. You can do 1 subject term if you want, or you can have multiple. Another piece of advice is if there are multiple subjects that your work touches upon, there is a point past which it's going to be diminishing returns. If you have 2 subject areas in here, great. If you have 3 subject areas, all right, still great. Once you get beyond a few different subject terms, like, you may start noticing that it's not really paying off in your results. I have sometimes seen people put in like 10 or 12 or 20 different subject terms, and that's usually not a good idea. That's too much. But you'll kind of figure this out along the way. If you run a search, if it turns out with like good results, you know you're doing something right. But if you end up with either 0 results or way too many results to the point where most of them are irrelevant for you, then something's wrong. But it's not the end of the world. If something's wrong, you can just back up and try again. If you do a bad search, the computer does not explode. The computer does not burst into flames. All you do is hit the back button and try again. And every time you try, you're going to get a little better at this, and it'll be more and more intuitive. So let's say I mean, I mentioned before as an example, like an environmental organization in Connecticut. Let's pretend that's us. So here we have environment. And like if you scroll through here, we have a lot of kind of major overarching categories, but in most of these, there will be subcategories. Click the little arrow here, and we have subcategories under the environment. And you can figure out, okay, are there other things here that apply to what I do? Maybe it's something related to biodiversity. And we want to look through, okay, are we working in forest preservation perhaps, or something even more specific than that? Or do we want to keep looking? Maybe we do something related to environmental education or something like that. Or maybe we just want to keep it broad. We just want to see, okay, who does environmental funding? And if we wanted, we could just leave it here. But also, if we wanted, we could explore and play around with some other terms here. Maybe the work we do intersects between like the environment and health. Again, lots of subcategories that you can look through here. And if something is worth your time, sometimes it's just looking through some of these terms here and messing around and seeing what we have and if there's anything here that looks interesting or relevant to you. And maybe you decide, hey, maybe I don't want to just use one term. Maybe I want to use two terms. If you have two subject terms here, then you have a couple of options. The default is it will take you to match any. If anyone's familiar with like Boolean search operators at all, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. If it's match any, this is going to maximize your results. You're going to get all of the environmental results, and you're also going to get all of the health results. So this is going to lead you to a longer list of results, which might be a good thing for you, or it might be a bad thing for you. Like maybe you need as many different results as you can get for your particular situation. But also, if you end up with thousands of results, but most of them are not actually relevant for you, most of them are not necessarily the strongest match for you, it might just be excess noise. It might be too much information. Because the other thing you can do with multiple subject terms is switch it to match all. So this is going to give you a shorter list, but a more focused list. This is only going to give you the intersection between environmental funders and health funders. Funders who care about both and mention both in their profiles. So this will be more focused. And again, that might be a good thing for you, or it might be a bad thing for you. If your subject terms are so specific that getting to the intersection between them, it turns out there is no intersection, then you might not get results, or you might get 3 results. But sometimes it means even if you have a very short list, like maybe there's 10 funders on your list, but maybe those 10 funders turned out to be a fantastic match for you, in which case it's a good thing. Your mileage may vary. Try things, see what you get, see if what you get looks good to you or if it doesn't look good to you. That is the main point here. But the other area to look at is geographic focus. Sometimes people are confused between geographic focus versus location. Location is lesser used. You don't usually need that unless you're in a situation where you want to find out, say, hey, who are the funders in my backyard, basically? Who are really locally based funders who I could potentially, say, meet in person? Or maybe you want to look up other nonprofits that are in your city or in your county or in your state. The location could be useful for kind of use cases like that. But usually what's important to you is not where someone is, it's where someone is willing to fund. So where are your programs happening? So if you're a Connecticut-based organization, and you could get more specific than this, like if you wanted, you could boil it down to like congressional district if you want, or like the county level, like give me Fairfield County, Connecticut, who funds there? Oftentimes I like to keep it at a state level. It's kind of the perfect happy medium. So you could put in Connecticut. You see right below, if you wanted to do Fairfield County, you could do that if you feel like it. But I think this is a pretty good search. Also, I don't know if there's anyone here who maybe has an organization that has its headquarters in Connecticut, but maybe you do your work somewhere else. Maybe the programs are centered elsewhere, including internationally. There are tons of organizations that are based here, but they have programs abroad somewhere. What do you do in that case? In that case, you want to focus your efforts on where the programs are happening. Like if you have your headquarters in Greenwich, for instance, but you are doing programmatic work in like Uganda. In that case, try putting Uganda into your geographic focus so that you have funders who care about work supporting Uganda in that case. So this alone, this is fine for a search. But what are some other things you could do? Population served, sometimes you might want to try that if like the specific audience you target is a really important part of what you do. Like for example, if you mostly serve children and youth, you might want to put that under population served, perhaps. Or if you serve a particular like ethnic or racial group, you might want to put that in. Serve a particular gender, maybe you serve people with disabilities, maybe you serve a low income population, or different religious groups, things like that. You might want to try that in population served. It is not a necessity, but depending on who you are and what you do, it might come in handy to try that. Other things that perhaps you might try, let's maybe skip past this level of these boxes for now, because that is not going to be like your usual way of searching. Support strategy, though, this is something that maybe you might have a use for. So this is like if you need a particular type of funding. For instance, if anyone out there is looking for general operating support grants, they're looking for the unrestricted money, which is what we all want ultimately. Like we all do our work better if we can get like some funding for our overhead, because the overhead is what keeps us alive enough to be able to run the programs. So if you wanted, you could click on general support, and this would identify funders who say, we give general operating support grants. I wouldn't get overly literal with the general support funders, because there will be funders out there who don't necessarily list general operating support as like their thing, but they'll provide those grants nonetheless. It's just they want to know you first. Maybe they want to have already given you a program grant for a couple of years before you have a comfortable working relationship, and they're willing to open up and give you unrestricted money at that point. But if you want to try, like, okay, who's really into funding overhead? All right, general support, good stuff. Also, let's say you are a newly established nonprofit. It is a lot harder for a new nonprofit to get grants compared to a nonprofit that's been around for a while. This is because foundations tend to be quite risk averse. Like they are very heavily regulated in the way they do their work, and so they don't like to take the biggest chances. They want to know that if they're giving someone a grant, that there's a pretty good chance that something good is going to happen with that money and that there's going to be an impact. And so because of that, they're most comfortable giving to an organization that can demonstrate a track record of success, that they can be like, all right, we've been around a while, and here are some of the good things we've done so far. Here is our impact upon the community. And if an organization is brand new, they don't necessarily have that track record yet, and it makes funders nervous. But the funders who are willing to take a chance on a new organization, that is going to be framed as seed money. You're going to find that under capacity building and technical assistance if you want it. Seed money. So you could click on that box if you're brand new. There's other good stuff in here too. Like for instance, if you're looking to have a merger with another organization, which honestly is something that more nonprofits should probably consider whether they want to or not. Like that's a nice thing to look for as well. Or if anyone is looking for funding for a capital campaign or building and renovations, things like that, maybe spend a little time under the capital and infrastructure area here. There's a lot of good stuff that you can play around with in here, and like it can serve you well. Let's see here. I see a question in the chat. And again, like if anyone's got questions, just throw them at me. Okay, if someone has a demonstrated track record of success founding and running an organization in the same focus area, but different geographically, is there a way to link those two organizations in the database so funders can consider this? My answer to that question is I wouldn't focus so much on connecting the two organizations in the database, but more about connecting the two organizations in your approach to the foundation. Like, for instance, in your grant proposal, or in your letter of inquiry, or even just in a phone call or a meeting with the funder before you apply. If you are a relatively new organization, but the people behind the organization are not new, and you've been involved in similar types of work at other organizations elsewhere that has been successful, I mean, that is a track record of success that you can lean on, even if this current organization happens to be new. So when you're writing your grant proposal and you want to kind of demonstrate your credibility to this funder, talk about the other work that's been done by the people who have founded this organization that is relevant to kind of the matter at hand, and that will help you, yes. Okay, a more database specific question. Is the directory available online through the library website, or must it be used in person? This would be used in person at the library. It is also a subscription database, so there are quite a lot of nonprofits who will subscribe to it so that they can access it in their own office. So a lot of larger organizations do that if they rely on grants heavily, but otherwise you're going to want to go to the library and use the database there. If a religious organization is looking for funding for a non-religious purpose, like a community garden or a concert, should you select religious organization in the search? That's a good question. I would maybe try using like your religious terminology in one of your searches and then also try another search without it. Because it's tricky sometimes for religious organizations, because if religion is part of your mission, the thing is, there are some funders who will support particular religions and funding those. And there are also quite a lot of funders who list in their giving limitations, we do not give to religious organizations. There's a lot of both. But if this particular program of yours really has nothing to do with religion, like a lot of like religious organizations, for instance, they'll be like, yeah, we run a food pantry. And regardless of any religious affiliation, the food pantry is helpful for everybody. If that's the case, I would maybe try a search without any religious affiliation and maybe just keep an eye on the funders you get and see if they make any mention of religion one way or another, if they're really opposed to funding religious organizations. Like, it might still be worth approaching them at some point, but they might not be your lowest hanging fruit. Okay, I'll take one more question and then I'll keep going and show you some search results. Okay, opportunities for a 501c4 to use this. Okay, so on a lobbying and advocacy organization, things are a little different. So I will say that there are a lot of organizations that have both a 501c3 and a 501c4 arm to their organization, so that they have the ability to do lobbying, but they also have the ability to do kind of more regular style programming that's going to be eligible for grant funding. So back on the subject of all the many regulations surrounding grant making foundations, they are really restricted on how much they can support lobbying, which is very, very little. It's not that they can't fund lobbying whatsoever, but it's that they are only allowed to provide so insignificant an amount of lobbying funding that for most of them, they don't consider it worth it to do it at all and to get the kind of scrutiny from the IRS that's going to come around if they try to provide any funding supporting lobbying, and they can't count it towards like their 5% annual payout rate either. So grant funding is not going to be as useful for a 501c4. 501c4s are usually much more reliant on individual giving for people who support the cause, but are less concerned about, say, the tax breaks that come along with that. But if you're a 501c4 that also has a 501c3 involved, like for instance, like a Planned Parenthood has both, a lot of the big organizations do. In that case, you could still potentially use it. So it's a complicated answer. If it's not clear enough, let me know and I'll talk about it more later. But first, let's get into kind of what a search is going to look like here. One other term I want to glance at before we run a search that you might use in a typical search is transaction type. So this is good if you're looking for something other than a straightforward cash grant. For example, if you're looking into corporate funders and maybe you're thinking you want not so much money, but you want donated products or donated equipment, or maybe some kind of like pro bono support, like corporate volunteers to come in and like, I don't know, help with your marketing plan or something like that. You can find that sort of thing under transaction type. This will be stuff that is just not necessarily a regular grant. So for instance, in-kind gifts, you could look under here and be like, oh yeah, donated products, there it is. Or maybe you want to use space that you don't necessarily have to go out there and pay for. Use of facilities, if a company is going to like let you use their boardroom for something, for instance. Or if anyone is not a nonprofit per se, but maybe you're a for-profit social enterprise. So you're not a 501c3, but you have a social mission. If that's the case, you're not eligible for grants necessarily, but the funders who like social enterprise, they will sometimes provide program-related investments. So if that were you and you want to get foundation money, but it's not a grant because like a social enterprise can't necessarily get those, you could get a program-related investment instead. So transaction type is sometimes useful as well. And then, of course, if you have a funder in mind already that you want to look up, you can put them under organization name and just go straight to them. Or like if you want to look up other nonprofits that are similar to yourself and find out who has been funding them in the past, you can look them up under organization name as well. It's good for both grant makers and grant recipients. Anyway, let's do a search and see who is funding environmental organizations in Connecticut. So we run a search. I have a feeling this might be a long list. Right? Oh yeah, because we're doing the intersection between the environment and health. We're isolating funders who care about both, and they are willing to fund in Connecticut. So this is a nice number, 346. You're going to get a series of lists. First, you get your list of funders. Then you get your list of, this is grants, this is grant recipients. So this is going to show you who has gotten grants already from particular foundations in the past. Grant recipients, so what nonprofits out there have been pretty successful at getting grant funding in the past? And then at the bottom, there's some tax returns if you want to look at those, but I wouldn't suggest that being your first course of action. Let's start at the top, grant makers. So we have all of our different foundations here, the name of the foundation, where they're based geographically, which is not always the same thing as where they fund. So don't worry too much if they're in like Wilmington, Delaware. That means they still fund in Connecticut. You have how much money they have in assets, how much money they've been giving out. Like the total giving refers to like how much they gave out, say, in the last recorded year tax-wise. So either like last year or the year before. Amount funded refers to how much they've been giving out over time in the subject area that you put into your search. So amount funded is more particular to you. Grant count is also specific to you. This is how many different grants have they given out in the subject area that you put into your search. RFPs, if they have a request for proposal out, they'll put that here, but those can be hard to come by. So I wouldn't hold my breath on those. So if you find something you like here, you're just going to click on it and take a look. And just keep in mind, if you see a big like banking institution, sometimes that turns out to be like a donor advised fund vehicle, and that is going to operate a little bit differently in that case. But let's take a look at a foundation. Let's look at our first one, Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. So that's going to be a community foundation. So up at the top, they'll tell you when was this information last updated. And if they have a website, it'll be here, but just remember, a lot of them won't have websites. And then we get these really handy charts that give us the lay of the land. What is the breakdown of like, what are the things that they fund the most versus what do they fund a little bit less? And where do you factor in the middle? I love this chart here on the left because this can really immediately at a glance give you an idea of where are you in their world of priorities. So if you wanted, you could get a closer look here. If you're an environmental organization, for instance, all right, let's look closer. Let's dive down the rabbit hole and find out, okay, what kind of environmental giving do they do a lot of? Looks like they do a lot of biodiversity funding. So look at that. All right, what type? Wildlife biodiversity. It gets even more specific. Whoa, boy, do they love to fund an aquarium. And so you can really get to the bottom of, okay, what do they actually tend to fund a lot? And at the bottom of the rabbit hole, you get the organizations that they have given to in this subject area. So we just went down to like the bottom of the aquarium giving of all things. It's very specific. And you might notice here, not everything is an aquarium. Some of this can be grant funding to, say, another organization for a program that is connected with, I don't know, like the Mystic Aquarium or something, or the Maritime Museum or something like that. And maybe it's something that can kind of like, oh, spread environmental education to this group of people, or bringing in groups of students to, I don't know, study marine biology or something like that. But the point is, you can get a lot of detail incredibly quickly this way. And you see, this is over the course of like the last 5 years. When you're done with the rabbit hole, just click return to at a glance, and you're where you were with this foundation. Can also see where are they giving the most. I mean, it's Hartford, so there's a lot of Connecticut funding here. And if anyone is doing work overseas, you can click this big button under the US map to switch it to a world map if you want. So you can see, do they fund outside of the US? Also, how big are the grants? So you can take a look at what are the typical grant sizes that they give out and how well does that align with what you are looking for. Because like there's a big difference between, say, asking for $5,000 or asking for $50,000 or asking for $500,000. And before you even start doing your research, you want to think through, what are you looking to fund? Is there a specific program of yours that you're looking to fund? Which one? What is the total cost of that program? And out of that total cost, how much are you looking to ask for from any one particular foundation? Like if the program costs $50,000 to run, are you asking, like you don't usually want to ask one funder to support the entire cost of the entire program, because like funders don't like that, first of all, usually. But also it puts you in a risky position where like even if they can fund you for 1 year, if they can't fund you the year after, what does that mean? Does that mean you have to shut down the program? You want to keep things diversified a little bit. So maybe you want them to fund maybe $20,000 worth of this program or $10,000 worth so that there's still room for like other avenues of financial support behind them so that you're a little more sustainable that way. But ultimately, you're trying to find the fit between what you do and what the funder does. Because the same way that you are very specific about what you do through your mission and your program descriptions, funders are also often quite specific about what their giving priorities are. They're like, we give to this, that, and the other thing. And if you fall into one of those buckets, great. And if you don't, then even if what you're doing is really important, it's just not a match. You want to find a match of interests. You want to find a match of values so that you can establish a real partnership with this funder and address common goals together. That's really what you're driving at here. So everything you're looking for in these funder profiles needs to drive towards finding a match of interests and values. So you want to look through and see, all right, who else has this funder been supporting in the areas that we put into our search, the intersection of environment and health, for instance. And they will give you listings of, here are some of the other organizations that have been funded. Here's when the grant happened, and here's how much it's for. And what's cool is you can also click on these dollar amounts, and sometimes that will give you a little information about what was this grant for. Sometimes they give you a lot to work with, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they say it's general operating support. But either way, this kind of gives you a little bit to work with when it comes to finding the fit. If they've funded people who are similar to you, or they funded programs that are similar to yours, that's actually a really good sign, because that means they care about the types of work that you are doing. So it's always great if you find that. You can get a full list of all the different subject areas that they support. We're looking at a community foundation, which usually gives more broadly than a private foundation typically will. But like sometimes it'll be a long list and sometimes it'll be short. Population groups that they like to give towards a lot. There's support strategies like, hey, general operating support, nice. Hey, seed money for new nonprofits, also nice. You might notice these gray boxes that list all these terms. These reflect those exact same search boxes that we were looking at in the advanced search. So all of these things, they speak to each other. And sometimes you might notice a term listed here that maybe you hadn't thought to put into your search, but you might want to. So you might want to try that on your next go round. Okay. Keep going down, you get the about section here, and this is the funder talking about themselves in their own words. And so you want to kind of pay close attention to the types of wording that a funder is using to describe what they care about. And does it vibe with the type of language that you use to talk about the things that you care about? If so, you might have a good match there. Sometimes they'll list program areas, and you can see, do we fit into any of these? This might be something interesting. Application information. So here's where they will tell you what to do next. Sometimes they'll list a number of different things that they want you to send them. Sometimes, like in this case, they say, go to our website, we'll tell you what to do there. Sometimes they will say, send us a one-page letter of inquiry, because that's the way a lot of funders like to proceed. And sometimes you will see, we do not give, like, we do not take unsolicited applications, or we only give to pre-selected applicants. You're going to see that a lot. But it's good to know why funders say we don't take unsolicited applications. It's not because they just hate you. It's not because, oh, we have just handpicked all of our favorites already. A lot of it is because, again, not everybody is the Ford Foundation. Not everybody has the manpower to take thousands of unsolicited applications every year. They can't handle it. They don't have enough people to read all of those. So they have to do something to kind of limit the number that they get. But just because they say don't send us unsolicited grant proposals doesn't mean you can't start a relationship with them. It doesn't mean you can't approach them. Doesn't mean you can't call them on the phone. You can and you should call them on the phone if they look like a good match for you. Don't call everybody on the phone that's like not necessarily a good match for you. But if it looks like you guys care about the same types of issues, it might be worth picking up the phone and giving them a call to introduce yourself and to say, you think there might be a good connection here between your various priorities, and you're wondering if it might be worth your time to send something their way. You can send them an email, or also if you've noticed that they've given grants to somebody you know, somebody you're friendly with, maybe somebody you partner with sometimes, that could be someone who makes an introduction for you. Or if you already have any funders, foundations talk to each other. It's a small world. A current funder can help introduce you to a new funder if they think you're well aligned there. So even if someone says no unsolicited grant applications, that doesn't mean scratch them off the list. It just usually means it's a slightly longer road to get there. They want to know who you are first. That's my speech about that. You want to look at their financials or their tax returns. Here's where those are. Who's who? So this is going to show you who is affiliated with this foundation. So again, if you can find any connections here, anyone you know at this foundation, or anyone that like one of your board members knows at this foundation, for instance, or one of your colleagues or one of your donors knows them, that's great for getting a foot in the door. Or at the very least, you can figure out, all right, who's the program officer here who I want to try to get in touch with? And it gives you a starting point of, who am I going to Google stalk today? Who am I going to track down on LinkedIn? Who am I going to call on the phone? It's good to know these names. And sometimes we have little LinkedIn icons next to people's names too, that can kind of like help you jump in and find out quickly if you know anyone in common. LinkedIn is great for when you're trying to get a foot in the door with a foundation. Communications, I mentioned earlier that we have our own news website at Candid. And so this is the part where our news items feed into the database, and you can find out, has the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving been in the news recently? Apparently, yes. Other kind of online communication things here. So you can say, follow them on social media, gives you an idea of what they're up to right now. What are they interested in? You can also interact with them a little bit on social media, and that helps kind of grow the relationship a little bit. At the bottom, contact information. When you're ready to make a move, the contact information will always be down here at the bottom for you. And when you're using this tool at your local public library and you want to save it for later, because as soon as you leave the Greenwich Library, access to the database leaves as well. So if you find something good and you want to hang on to it for later, at the top of every grantmaker profile, you've got your toolbar here. So if you find something you like and you want to hang on to it for later, email it to yourself. Every time you find something good, email it to yourself or email it to a colleague, etc. It's a great idea. Also, I don't know if Greenwich Library has like IP access throughout the building so that you can access it in the library on your own device, but a lot of libraries will do that. When that's the case, you can also just save it as a PDF to your computer. You can also export lists of results this way and just have like, here's a list of 100 names of foundations that came up in our search, and you can kind of manipulate that later on and play around with it. You can always save these things for later, and that can be really, really helpful for you. We got any questions on anything I've been talking about? Because I want to make sure we have a chance to glance at GuideStar as well. GuideStar, I don't think we need to talk about as long as we're talking about Foundation Directory, but I think it's good for you to know about it. Okay, let me see here. Can an organization that is structured as a nonprofit but uses a fiscal sponsor for their 501c3 status, can the nonprofit be listed on GuideStar? Okay, we're already getting ahead of ourselves onto GuideStar. The answer to that question is not yet, but ultimately that is a goal of ours. Right now, we don't have fiscally sponsored organizations visible on GuideStar yet. We only have places that have their own 501c3 status. But right now, it is a goal of kind of our data team to make it so that at some point within the next year or so, fiscally sponsored groups will be able to have their own standalone presence on GuideStar. So we are working on it. Any other questions, especially foundation directory related questions, so that then we'll be able to cover that and then move into GuideStar. You could also unmute and ask a question if you feel like it. Makes sense, the whole thing about how you want to look up other organizations that are similar to yourself so that you understand who's funding them, because that's actually a bigger part of finding funding than people realize, I think. Because there's what funders say about their giving. We like to give to the environment, but actions speak louder than words, and it's often nice to see on the ground who have they actually been funding. And you can see to what extent have they been funding organizations that are well aligned with the type of work that you do. It's really good information to see. So with that in mind, like you can see that from your results list after you've looked at the grant makers. You can move your way down to the grants. What grants have happened along these lines, and you can learn a little bit more about them, how much money has been going out in here, and you can click on these grant amounts to see if you can get a description of that program or not. This is all really interesting information that you can take a look at. Or you can look at other organizations. Like if you wanted to look up the Greenwich Hospital, for instance, and see who has been funding the Greenwich Hospital over the years, so I can help get more ideas on who else I might want to approach. Like the Greenwich Hospital, they have their own recipient profile. Everybody does, where you can have an idea of how do they fund themselves? What grant sizes do they get? What funders are there? And are there ideas of other funders that maybe we want to click on and learn a little bit more about? And they'll say, hey, what subject matter was connected with this? Do we want to learn more about, oh, they got funding for something related to Alzheimer's. Maybe that connects with the work we're doing, etc. And you can look at, hey, what subject areas do they have affiliated with themselves? And are there other ideas of things we want to put into our searches this way? All right, so we have a good sense of how to use the foundation directory at this point. And it really just, it makes more sense the more and more you use it. So just keep trying it. It'll get easier and easier. Okay. Here's a good question that can help transition us into GuideStar. What do the designations next to the recipients mean of like basic, gold, silver, etc., things like that? I don't think it looks like Greenwich doesn't have that next to their name, but a lot of these funders that you're going to look at will have it next to their name. So for instance, let's take a look at all of these different nonprofits in the grants list, and you'll see, oh, who are these people that have like platinum next to them? Those are their GuideStar seals of transparency. So these databases talk to each other. So let me show you what exactly we mean by all of these different things. I'm going to move ahead to show you how Foundation Directory relates to GuideStar. So the same way we're trying to research funders, funders are researching all of us too. So GuideStar is an interesting thing. Every 501c3 nonprofit has a presence on GuideStar, whether they've done anything with it or not. And this is because, just like with funders, part of the deal of being a 501c3 nonprofit organization is that your tax returns are public documents and anyone can look at them. And your tax returns, your 990s, are on GuideStar. And those create kind of a baseline for your nonprofit's GuideStar profile. And this is what, I mean, just the general public will use GuideStar to research nonprofits, and nonprofits will research each other using GuideStar. But above all, foundations and high net worth donors and people who have donor advised funds They all use GuideStar to research potential grantees and nonprofits that they might want to donate to. So you all have a presence already on GuideStar, which is based off of your tax returns. But if you want, you also have the option to go into GuideStar and claim your profile for your organization. And that gives you editing privileges to go in and add additional information to kind of take charge of your own narrative and use it like a storytelling tool. So that when funders are researching you, whether it's someone who just wants to like have an idea of like, hey, who are some good environmental organizations we might want to look into funding someday, or if you've submitted a grant application and they're doing their due diligence during their review process, they're going to look you up on GuideStar then and try to learn more about you. What are they going to find when they get there? So the more information that you add to your nonprofit's GuideStar profile, the greater the seal of transparency you're going to receive. They move from bronze all the way up to platinum, depending on how much you put in. A bronze seal of transparency, if you claim your profile, which is a pretty quick process, like the candid support staff, they will vet you and make sure that you are a real legitimate representative of your organization. They're not handing over access to your profile to randos out there. Once they grant you access to it, you can go in, and if you just put in your mission statement and make sure that your contact information is up to date on your profile, that's automatically going to give you a bronze seal of transparency. And that takes about 5 minutes to do. And it's nice because it just means if someone out there finds you and they want to send you a donation totally unsolicited, do they have the most up-to-date contact information to reach you with that? If you want to go a little further, you can provide some programmatic information. You can describe just a few of your top programs. If you want to put your logo in there, your taglines, social media handles, you can do that. It takes just a little bit longer, but not the longest. That will give you a silver seal of transparency. And these are the things that you are seeing when you're seeing like those like markers that say silver or whatever next to a nonprofit's name in the foundation directory, because our systems are talking to each other. If you add even more information, stuff about your finances, your leadership, demographics, things like that, that is going to give you a gold seal of transparency. That will take a little more time to do, but the gold seal of transparency is really giving funders and donors a lot of information to work with. And the platinum seal of transparency is the top level. That's focused on impact. If you want to share some metrics and kind of demonstrate the impact that your programs have been having, that's going to give you a platinum seal of transparency. And it means anyone who looks you up is going to find a ton of information, not just about what happens behind the scenes in finances and operations, but how effective is the work that you do. It's a nice supplement to your website, and it saves funders a lot of time, and it saves you a bit of time that you don't have to repeat yourself so frequently when you're talking to donors and funders when you're out there in the world. And this doesn't cost a dime to do, to update your profile. It is a completely free way to kind of build your identity online. But I'm also not just saying this for no reason. These things have results. There was a study done in an accounting journal that studied 2 cohorts of nonprofits over a couple of years. In year 1, nobody had a seal of transparency on their profile on GuideStar. In year 2, one cohort got a seal of transparency, the other cohort did not. And it was found that the nonprofits that took the time to update their GuideStar profile and get a seal of transparency next to their name, they got 53% more donations than those who did not. So there are real results here. Who's looking at these things? There's over 200 different partner organizations and companies that make use of this data, but this is like a small sampling. A lot of the big tech companies use it, for instance. If you've ever run a Facebook fundraiser or donated to a Facebook fundraiser, for instance, the information about such and such nonprofit gets pulled automatically from GuideStar, for example. People who have a donor advised fund, their kind of online platforms, when they are looking to find new organizations to donate to, it's all hooked up on the back end to GuideStar and helps them do their research. The grants management platforms, when you're applying for grants, a lot of these big sets of software that people are using, like Flux and things like that, those are hooked up to GuideStar so that when funders are doing their due diligence and they're reviewing your application, they can pull you up quickly and easily on GuideStar and figure out the extent to which they're interested in funding you. So this is good, interesting, useful stuff to do here. Let me see here. Can for-profit social enterprises list themselves on GuideStar or only nonprofits? So far, it's only nonprofits. It's only people who have like those public tax returns and the 501c3 status. That being said, it is possible that someday social enterprises might have a place on GuideStar, but right now you got to have that 501c3 to be on there. But I can also let our backend team know that there's interest in having social enterprises be visible on there too. So the bronze seal here, pretty easy to do. Just make sure your mission and your contact information are up there. Bing, bang, boom. Silver seal of transparency goes a little further. So here's like a visual of what it looks like when people are putting in programmatic information. It starts to look kind of nice in GuideStar. So you can pick some of your top programs, write a short blurb about here's what this program is, here's what that program does. You can put in what geographic area or population is being served by these, and it helps people out when they're trying to understand what you do better. Do you make grants or not? You can also do that. You can put in photos and videos if you want to, which can make this a pretty nice supplement to your website if that's the case. This is optional to put in photos and videos, but like, yeah. And yeah, put in your social media, etc. So bronze and silver are easy. If you want to go higher and get gold, finances, we already have a little bit of financial information from you that comes straight from your tax returns. But if you have audited financial statements, getting gold is a lot faster because you can just upload a recent audited financial statement and it's just going to automatically update that way. And it's going to show how you're doing financially over time like this. If you don't have audited financial statements, it'll just ask you a series of questions and you answer them. And you also have the option to put in demographic information for your staff, if you like, as well. And this gives people a lot of good information as well, especially as funders are increasingly like interested in trying to diversify their funding efforts and kind of level the playing field because, for instance, BIPOC-led nonprofits, they have traditionally been getting less funding than white-led nonprofits. And this kind of information, it's helpful for funders. Also, if you get a gold seal of transparency, you could, if you wanted, get free access to the foundation directory if you have a gold seal of transparency and if you are a nonprofit that has an annual budget of $1 million or less. You put in enough information to get a gold seal, and you are an organization that's $1 million or less in budget size, we will send you a code to give you 1 year's free access to the foundation directory. And so that's a pretty nice deal there. Finally, platinum, that's all about impact. If you have a recent strategic plan, I think from like the last 5 years, you can just upload that and it'll immediately populate. Otherwise, it'll ask you 2 questions. What's your organization aiming to accomplish? And what are your strategies for making it happen? Those are pretty straightforward questions that I think anyone should be able to answer about their nonprofit anyway. So that will kind of help you out a little bit. And then it gives you an option to put in some metrics that display the impact your programs have been having over the years. And since we're just coming out of a long pandemic, where things have been hard, if you've had some difficult years in your past where maybe you haven't been having the impact that you would otherwise be wishing that you've had, you can also include context notes in there, being like, yeah, our reach plummeted in 2020 and 2021, for instance, because a global pandemic was happening. Funders understand, because that is something that a lot of nonprofits have gone through. Some other nonprofits have found that, hey, their metrics exploded in the pandemic. Like if you're a food pantry, for instance, you got a lot of use, and that will affect what your impact looks like. So the point is, you could add context if you need to. And if you're stuck on what kind of metrics to include to display your impact, we also have a cool tool available for you on GuideStar called the Common Results Catalog. That's just, I'm not going to show it here because it'll take forever, but it's a really long PDF listing of all sorts of different subject areas for organizations and a list of ideas of types of metrics you could try. It's useful for your GuideStar profile, but it's also kind of useful in life. Like if anyone is trying to do more outcome measurement work at your nonprofit and you need help and you need ideas, the Common Results Catalog is kind of good for things like that, but you can find that on GuideStar as well. So when it comes to claiming your candid profile, how do you do it? It's pretty simple. You go on GuideStar. If you don't already have like a free username and password, just click create account, do a login. So you're going to want to claim your nonprofit's profile by connecting your account to your organization. You set up a username and password. If you can, use like your organizational email with a .org address rather than like your personal Gmail. It's going to save us time on the back end for verifying that you're a legitimate representative of your nonprofit and not just some stranger. Once you've started your profile, search for your nonprofit on GuideStar and validate your connection. They'll just ask you like, hey, who are you? Who is your organization? And we will kind of check you out for a minute and make sure that it's really you, you're really with your nonprofit. Try to use your work email address if you can. At that point, when you're approved, log back into your profile and you can click update nonprofit profile, edit this organization here. And at that point, oh, I already showed this slide. At that point, you're going to be in a pretty good position to start adding some information. And we have a lot of good resources that can help you. Like the help section on GuideStar is really useful. I'm going to pop out of here again and just kind of show you what this looks like in real time. And if you have other questions about GuideStar, I'm happy to answer those as well. I think I saw one in the chat a moment ago. Can churches be on GuideStar? Churches are nonprofits, so yes. The one difference with churches is churches and other houses of worship, their 990s are not necessarily visibly public the way other 501c3s are, which is kind of an old rule that I don't know if that's always going to remain the case, but it is the case right now. But you are a 501c3 nonprofit. And so, yeah, like houses of worship have a presence on GuideStar. And yeah, you can have your profile there. But like our support team can always help you out if you have trouble finding yourself on GuideStar. Because sometimes people can't find themselves and it's for various reasons. Sometimes they're part of a larger system, like for instance, library systems and school systems. You might be one piece of a much larger unit and that can get confusing. Or like if you're very small and maybe you have annual revenue of less than 50,000 a year, that might make you harder to find in GuideStar if you're small. If you run into trouble, hit the area where it says support and like contact our support people and they'll help you out. It's their job. But like you see this area up here where it says update nonprofit profile. I'm logged in as myself. I work for Candid. Therefore, my organization on GuideStar is listed as Candid, and we keep our profile up to date because we're Candid. And so you can just click in there and edit your profile whenever you want. But like when people are looking up organizations on GuideStar, what does it look like? A lot of times I like to start by just not putting in anything and hitting the search button and kind of narrowing things down. So let's say you want to look at different nonprofits that are in Connecticut. There are over 36,000 different active nonprofits in Connecticut. And if you wanted to narrow it down further to like specific zip codes or regions, you could do that. If you wanted to narrow down specific subject areas, you would click on organization, look through subject areas similar to how you would in the foundation directory. And you could say, show me the environmental organizations in Connecticut. And now we're down to 1,500 environmental organizations that are based in Connecticut. And you can take a look, and it just makes people stand out when they have their GuideStar profile claimed and filled out, and it makes you look good. And it makes you look transparent, like you have nothing to hide. You're not trying to pull one over on a funder, for instance. Let me show you like what it looks like when someone has a platinum seal of transparency. Okay, like let's try one of these. Let's try Food Rescue US. What does that look like? So they have their tagline, be the rescue. They have their mission statement, they have contact information. They list what is the population that they serve. They have information about their programs, what is the problem that they aim to solve versus the programs that are working on solving that program, where do they operate geographically. They included photos and a video, it's always nice. What's their impact looking like? And so the impact will kind of tell a story over time, like in many cases, a story of growth of your reach and your impact. Do we align with any of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals? It's always kind of a nice feature. Stuff about your goals, your future, what are your strategies going forward? A lot of detailed information here. Then you can look into your finances here, revenue and expenses, which also just tells a story over time. And if you've had any difficult years in the past, and a lot of us have, you have the option to explain why, so that it makes sense. So there's all kinds of detail here that you can fiddle around with. It's pretty extensive, as you can see. But yeah, it helps donors out, it helps funders out so that they understand who they're getting involved with here. Here's your people. Got demographics listed here. So you really have quite a lot of information telling just what's your narrative here. So that is really what it looks like when you're looking at yourself on GuideStar, if you've entered some information. So that's more or less what I have to share with you. Do we have other questions before we get ready to wrap up for the day? Whether about GuideStar, Foundation Directory, other Candid stuff. I've been with Candid forever. So if you have a question, I'll either know the answer or I'll know where you can turn to find the answer. Does that mean we're good? We've covered everything in the whole wide world? Because you could also just unmute and ask me out loud if it takes too long to type things in. Okay, and I can also put my email address in the chat if later on you think of something, you're like, oh, I should have asked that lady this question and now it's too late. It's never too late. Okay, my email address is in the chat. So if you think of something later, that's me. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. Well, I think that sort of takes care of that. If there's no further questions. So, Tracy, really do appreciate you taking time out of your day to go over all of this with our patrons. And if anybody needs help in the library, I know it was mentioned earlier, you can use your laptop in the library. You don't have to be using one of the library's computers to do it. You just have to be in the building. But yeah, reach out to myself, reach out to Tracy. Thank you for sharing your email. And have a great day, everyone. I'll share the recording too, so you can refer back to it. I'll email everyone later this afternoon. All right. Thank
Hey,
you.
thanks, everybody, and good luck with your fundraising.